Good evening and welcome to the last night of the second annual I Heart Pluto Festival, February 18th, 2021. It's really an important day because it's not only, this is the anniversary of the discovery of Pluto, but also, of course, today with Perseverance landing on Mars, it's really an exciting time. We're pleased to bring I Heart Pluto this week. My name is Kevin Schindler, and I'm the historian at Lowell Observatory. And I'm sitting now in the plate vault at Lowell Observatory that has thousands of photographic plates, including one right above my head here, which is one of the discovery plates of Pluto. So we're really pleased to be able to share the Pluto heritage with everybody. Tonight we have a special presentation. It's family night for I Heart Pluto. And with us is Victoria Girgis, and you might recognize her name. I'm going to bring up a picture. You might recognize her name because, gosh, a year and a half ago or so, she captured this picture with the one of the telescopes of the Giovanni Open Deck Observatory. And it shows, she was trying to take a picture of some deep sky objects, and these lines are all satellites, Starlink satellites that went through the field of view. And this picture has been going around the world and going round and round. It's been in so many different newspapers and magazines, and soon a book. So it's really neat. Victoria captured that picture, and she's with us here tonight. So one of our educators here at Lowell Observatory, who's just about to graduate and move on to grad school. So I'll turn it over to Victoria, and you can talk about what you're going to do tonight for the family.
Thank you for that introduction, Kevin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so tonight I'm going to be talking about the discovery of Pluto and, more importantly, how Pluto got its name. So the discovery of Pluto really starts with all the other planets in our solar system. And all the planets through Saturn we can actually see with our bare eyeballs. You don't need a telescope at all. And so no one actually discovered any of these planets that you see on the screen now. Instead, people always knew they existed, and so they were just a part of the sky. And they were something that everybody knew about. Everything kind of changed in 1781 when an astronomer named William Herschel discovered the planet Uranus, though at first he suggested the name George. That didn't catch on, though. But he discovered Uranus, and the thing is, Uranus was behaving oddly. It was not obeying the laws of gravity that scientists like Isaac Newton set out. It was speeding up in parts of its orbit where it shouldn't have been. So, either scientists had to throw out all the laws of physics that they knew and held true to their hearts, or there was something else missing. And it turns out that there was, in fact, something else missing. And that something was the planet Neptune. Neptune is the next planet out from the sun, from Uranus. And it turns out that Neptune was pulling on Uranus just a little bit with the force of gravity. And that was speeding Uranus up in parts of its orbit where otherwise it shouldn't have been. So Neptune was supposed to fix the solar system and make everything work again. But the problem is it didn't. So around the late 1800s, astronomers thought that they were seeing weird perturbations or those weird irregularities in Neptune's orbit as well. So they thought Neptune is behaving oddly too. It turns out that they just measured Neptune's mass wrong. So they had one number wrong, and that was throwing everything off. But an astronomer at Lowell Observatory, the founder of Lowell Observatory, Percival Lowell, he first searched for Planet X, but he was unsuccessful. And then in his legacy, astronomers at Lowell Observatory wanted to restart the search for Planet X in the late 1920s. And that is where this young man, Clyde Tombaugh, comes in. Clyde Tombaugh built his own telescopes in his backyard and observed planets like Mars and Jupiter, which were particularly bright. He then drew what he saw through the telescope and sent those drawings here to Lowell Observatory. Then our director was so impressed that he hired him to search for Planet X as an astronomer's assistant. So Clyde Tombaugh his job was to find Pluto. And what he did was he would take these giant pictures that were 11 by 17 inches across through our Pluto Discovery Telescope, which is what it's now called. And he would take these images for about an hour at a time. It took an hour for each picture to gather enough light to be sensitive enough to find something as far away from the sun as Pluto. Pluto is really, really difficult to spot because it's so far from the sun. So he took images a whole lot like this. This is a tiny zoomed in portion of that original 11 by 17 inch image. And of course, the arrow wasn't there when Clyde Tombaugh was discovering Pluto. But what you can notice is Pluto moves. So as I go to the next picture, you can see that that tiny dot disappears from the spot that it was at and reappears over on the other side of the image. And this is actually how Clyde Tombaugh discovered Pluto. He found Pluto based on its motion. And so he was able to see that this tiny dot moved. So that told him it had to be much, much closer than any of those other stars. And instead, it had to be in our solar system. So he showed that Pluto, this tiny little dot that jumps back and forth across the screen, was in our solar system. And he actually did it a whole lot like this. He used a machine called a blink comparator that allowed him to match up the two plates, the two images, right on top of each other, match up all the bright stars, and then flip back and forth between them just like this in order to more easily find Pluto. But now that he found Pluto, which this is a beautiful image of it taken with the New Horizons spacecraft in 2015, now that he found Pluto, he needed a name for it. And Clyde Tombaugh decided to take suggestions from all over the world. So lots of people wrote in and they said for us to name it after their loved ones, like their parents or their siblings. But we didn't like most of those suggestions. Instead, one really piqued our interest, and that was from a young British schoolgirl. She was actually about 11 years old, named Venetia Burney. And Venetia Burney heard from her grandfather, I believe, that a new planet had been discovered. And she knew the names of all the other planets, and she knew that they were named after figures in Roman and Greek mythology. And so she suggested the name Pluto because it was a name that hadn't been used yet. And so she thought it fit very well. Us at Lowell Observatory really liked the name Pluto because the first two letters are P and L, which are Percival Lowell's initials. And so we thought it paid a homage to him as well. And so that is how we chose the name Pluto. But I mentioned this picture taken with the New Horizons spacecraft. Even though Clyde Tombaugh's pictures were stunning and phenomenal and we found Pluto, we couldn't learn much more about Pluto that way. In fact, even with telescopes like the Hubble Space Telescope, we couldn't really see Pluto in a lot of detail. So we needed an orbiter, or a flyby. New Horizons was not an orbiter, sorry. But we needed something to go past Pluto and get up close and personal with it. And so that happened in 2015 when the New Horizons probe finally flew by Pluto. And we learned a lot more about its surface. And so next, for our next segment, we'll show a video of me talking about all the cool science that New Horizons did and learned about on the surface of Pluto. I'm going to stop sharing.
Hi everybody, Victoria with Lowell Observatory here, and I got some liquid nitrogen here to show you guys some cool demonstrations with it. The first step is to put on your safety gloves because liquid nitrogen is very, very cold. It's about 300 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit and about 200 degrees below 0 Celsius. So it would be very, very bad if I were to touch this without gloves. Now, in Earth's atmosphere, we have a lot of nitrogen as a gas. So that means little tiny nitrogen particles are zipping around like crazy and they move around a lot. But on places like Pluto, nitrogen is a liquid, even sometimes a solid. So there are places where nitrogen is frozen. And that means little nitrogen particles can't move very much. They stick together, and they're a lot closer together. So here I have liquid nitrogen, but it is actually undergoing a phase change. So the liquid nitrogen is turning into gaseous nitrogen. So it's turning back into a gas because Earth's atmosphere is so warm for liquid nitrogen. Obviously, the Earth's atmosphere isn't 300 degrees below zero. Otherwise, we would be very different as people, I think. But the cool thing about liquid nitrogen is we can freeze things in it. So here, I have a flower, and when I hit the flower with the rubber mallet, not much happens because the flower is kind of squishy. It's malleable. But when I freeze the flower, it only takes a little bit. The very interior parts of the flower didn't freeze though because only the outside of the flower did. So I could even freeze it again. And that cloud you see come off every time I dip the flower in, that's nitrogen turning back into a gas, but faster. There goes our flower. All in the name of science. Back in 2015, the New Horizons spacecraft flew by Pluto. This was the first spacecraft to ever fly by Pluto, and so we learned a lot about it. Up until that point, we only could use Pluto or observe Pluto from nearby Earth, which is really far away. So we didn't know a whole lot about its surface. But with New Horizons, we learned that Pluto has that liquid frozen nitrogen on its surface, and that it also has some volcanic activity possibly. So there could be volcanoes out on Pluto. But if there are volcanoes on Pluto, they're very different from volcanoes here on Earth. In fact, they're probably something called cryovolcanoes. So I'm going to do a demonstration of a cryovolcano here. And first, we're going to use some boiling water. I also want to say don't do this at home because it is a little dangerous, but I'm a professional scientist. Alright, so we've got water, and then we're going to add the liquid nitrogen to the water. Now what's going to happen is the nitrogen is going to very quickly turn from a gas or from a liquid into a gas. And that's going to condense water vapor out of the atmosphere and cause a big cloud. Now, here it goes. Ta-da! So again, most of the cloud you see is actually water vapor. So that's water condensing out of the air and getting denser. But all that nitrogen went from being a liquid into being a gas very, very quickly. And that's why it erupted out of the bucket. Thanks for watching, everybody. Now I'll take questions in the live YouTube stream if you have them. So leave them in the comments. Thank you.
So thank you for that. Now our next part is we want to hear from you guys. We want to hear from all of you kids out there. And now that you know a little bit more about the surface of Pluto, we want you to use your imagination and think about what you would have to do to live on the surface of Pluto. So make a drawing or something like that and send it to info@lowell.edu. That's info at lowell.edu. And we'll look through those and we would love to see what you guys come up with.
Great. Thanks, Victoria. Thanks for the great presentation. And, you know, it's another reminder that science can be so much fun. There are a lot of different ways of learning things. And of course, we read things in the books and, you know, learn things from teachers and such. But experiments like this really make it a lot of fun, especially when we're using things like flowers that stuff that we're familiar with in everyday life. So thanks for making science fun for everybody. We have time for a few questions, and so we'll take some of those. First of all, Victoria, we have a question. If I want to go into this field and do what you're doing, what's the best way of doing it?
I don't know. I ended up at Lowell Observatory on kind of a whim, but the best thing to do, I think, is just to follow what you're passionate about, and to pursue science in some aspect, but find the area of science that you really enjoy. And for me, that's experimental physics, but for you, it could be something totally different. Great.
Here's another question from the Pluto Diaries. We're glad to see you back. Who made the final decision for the name of Pluto? It's the IAU now, but I guess it wasn't back then. And
I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I can touch on that.
If you would, Kevin.
So the observatory kind of had the right to choose the name because it was discovered here. You could say Clyde-Tombaugh did, or the observatory did, but the observatory works as a unit. And so, like Victoria was saying, the first time Pluto was suggested was by an 11-year-old girl, Venetia Burney. A lot of other people have suggested that, but hers was the first one, and that made it really nice that it was as a kid, and that really brought younger people into the conversation. So she had said that, or her grandfather talked to a friend who sent a telegram to Lowell, and when the observatory suggested that, they sent it into it wasn't really the International Astronomical Union doing that yet, but they sent it to the American Astronomical Society, and it was more of an announcement. It wasn't quite as formal as it is today. Like today, even if you come up, like when things are discovered, quite often they get nicknames like Xena a few years ago. But it's more of a formal process now to go through. So here's another question. Will there be another Pluto Festival next year? And that is an excellent question. Yes, because we plan on doing these. This is an annual event. So we'll have the third annual next year. And hopefully, if things continue to go as they are, we'll still offer some virtual events, but we'll also do a lot of stuff live. And that's how we did last year. So we did in-person tours and in-person talks and stuff. So, and we expect to bring our Pluto beer back also, like this year. Okay, we've got another question. Victoria, how long have you been at Lowell? And what are your plans for the future?
I've been at Lowell for about 3 years now as an educator, and I love it. It's wonderful. But next, I'm going to graduate school.
And what are you going to study? You've mentioned before.
Experimental physics.
Okay. And what's been your favorite part of working here at Lowell Observatory?
Getting to do fun things like the liquid nitrogen cloud. That's one of my favorite demonstrations to be able to do. Definitely, I miss doing our science demos every night. Those were one of the highlights of working at Lowell.
How was it the first time you did that demonstration? Were you knew what to expect, but it still surprised you, or you've seen it enough times?
Yeah, it still surprised me a little bit. It's always shocking.
Here's another question. What's your favorite planet?
My favorite planet is actually Jupiter.
And why is that?
It was the first one I ever found through a telescope.
And was that here at Lowell or before you were here?
It was at Lowell. I didn't start messing around with telescopes until I came to Lowell. And that was
with the 24-inch with the historic Clark telescope?
No, it was one of our portable telescopes.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's great. We really appreciate you coming on tonight and offering this really great event for families. We have so much great stuff to talk about with Pluto. Of course, the basic part of it is the science. That's the most important part. But there's so many ways to celebrate Pluto, and we're going to continue that tonight. A little bit later, we're going to do a tour retracing Clyde Tombaugh steps, the day he discovered Pluto. And then later on, we're going to bring in leaders and Astronomy Magazine editor Dave Eicher, family members of Clyde Tombaugh, to talk about why people are so in love with Pluto. So we've got a lot of great things the rest of the night. Thank you, Victoria, for joining us today. Thanks for our tech team, Richard, Heather, and Danielle, for keeping everything running. And stay tuned. In a few minutes, we'll retrace Clyde Tombaugh's day on this date in 1930. Thank you.